Hello there. On behalf of all of us at Kensington, I want to welcome you to the service. We're so glad you're here with us today, whether that's in person or online. If we haven't met, I'm Jenny Warnes, Discipleship Director at the Birmingham campus, which I just have to mention will be officially reopening for in-person services on May 2nd. Woohoo! Right now, I want to invite you to a couple upcoming opportunities. The first is baptism. We're so grateful to be able to offer on-site baptism at all campuses on May 2nd. It's less than a month away. We just celebrated the resurrection of Jesus on Easter and how he's calling all of us into new life. Baptism is the perfect way to demonstrate new life and keep the celebration going. When I was baptized, I'd been a follower of Jesus for a long time, but it was a pivotal moment in my faith journey as I surrendered some significant areas of my life that I'd been holding on to. Baptism was my public declaration of my trust in Jesus and his power to transform me. So, if you felt a stirring, a tug, a desire to demonstrate your commitment to follow Jesus, this might be your time. Don't delay. Go to kensingtonchurch.org/baptism for more information and to register. There's nothing like that moment, coming up out of the water, declaring that you're a follower of Jesus and have new life in him. The other event I want to invite you to is online next Sunday evening, April 18th. It's another Faith in the Family event with the one and only, or do I say two and only? Well, it's Dave and Ann Wilson. For Justin and me as parents, some of the best intentional ideas and parenting hacks came from Dave and Ann. So I'm thrilled to have them coming back to share their parental wisdom with us from their brand new book, No Perfect Parents. No one is perfect, but it is perfect timing all the way around. We're in our new series, The Family, here at Kensington this month. Their book is hitting shelves soon, and on the home front, we could really use a bit of encouragement right about now. Any other parents out there agree? So, put a reminder in your phone for April 18th at 8:30 p.m. and register now for this free online event at kensingtonchurch.org/faithandfamily. We're starting our new series today, The Family. Coming through the stress of this last year, our families have been stretched like never before. And that stretching has produced some beautiful moments, but also some very painful and broken moments. So this series is about experiencing the transforming and restorative power of Jesus in our families. So, let's lean in and see what God has for us today. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone who's sitting here in the auditorium and those of you who are watching us online. It's my pleasure to be here to say welcome to Kensington. My name's Tracy Henkel. I'm the Discipleship Director at this campus. And if you're new or a first-time visitor here, we just want to invite you out to the hub in the lobby. That is the place where you can learn about Kensington, ask any questions, just all things Kensington are at the hub, and our volunteers are there wearing bright orange shirts and would love to talk to you. So welcome if you're a first-time visitor. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about our volunteers. Each week we are highlighting different volunteer teams that we'd like to invite you to be a part of. And this is really near and dear to my heart because I used to lead the volunteer teams a long time ago, and I learned something really powerful about serving by working with people. When you join a volunteer team, you don't walk in the doors and not know anybody anymore. You make friends, and this place becomes more like home. So this week I want to talk to you about the Usher Greeter team and K-Kids. And if you walked in today, if you're here in the building, you were greeted by people at the door. People are serving inside the auditorium here. People are serving in the kids area, and we really could use some more help. So we want to invite you to check that out online. And I just want to also say about the kids area, you know, people are intimidated because they think they have to be the Sunday school teacher. But you don't. There are all different ways to serve back there. It's super fun and easy, and it just really creates a space for our kids to be while everyone's in the auditorium. So check out those volunteer teams if you feel a little nudge, or if you have questions, just go to the hub. And then I want to tell you about our Kaleo Kids program. It's a really unique, one-of-a-kind arts program where kids are acting and singing and dancing, and they get to explore and develop those talents, all the while meeting other kids and learning more about God's love. And the cool thing about our spring session is we have two different ways for kids to participate. Either online, can you imagine an arts program online, but we figured out how to do it, and also social distancing in person. So you can find out more information about Kaleo Kids online, and you can register that way as well. And then, as Jenny said in the video, we're kicking off our new series today, The Family, and we're welcoming back Cliff Johnson to teach today. He was formerly the Birmingham teaching pastor, and now he's what we call our central pastor, who he gets to teach at all different services, which we love that about just having different voices speaking to you, teaching from the stage. So Cliff will be back. He was here at Easter. It was his first time teaching at Clinton Township, so be sure to welcome him and let him know just how great our campus is, how glad we are he's here. So week 1 is about the Father. He'll be talking about that. And we're going to continue our service, though, like we often do, with a really fun song. And I just challenge you, if you can sit still in these seats, I don't know. It's a fun ditty. You're going to love this. Check it out.
Singing in the kitchen, family. Running through the yard, family. Going on vacation, family. On a credit card, family. We're all in this together, family. We're taking a chance, family. Until a feather, family. Take off your shoes and dance. To the city, family. Laughing in the rain, family. It ain't always pretty, family. Can drive you insane, family. We got the keys to the kingdom, family. All the cards, family. All 4 seasons, family. Oh, bless your heart. Some are amazing, all got a little bit of everything. Family, sons and daughters, family, like a photograph, family, baptized in the water, family, put me on a map, family. We're all in this together, family. We're taking a chance, family. Like birds of a feather, family. Pick off your shoes and dance. Pick off your shoes and dance. Pick off your shoes and dance.
What a great song. I don't know what was flooding through your mind when that song was going, but I know in my mind I was thinking of the road trips that we took as a family when I was growing up. I grew up in the 80s mostly. Any other 80s growing up people? How about people grew up in the 70s? Okay, how about the 60s? Anyone earlier than that? All right, fantastic. It's good to have you here. I think about when I grew up, man, think about those road trips. If you're the 80s, 70s, even some of the 90s, any 90s here? Okay, sorry, I don't want to ignore the millennials. They're going to get hurt feelings. Just kidding. And Gen Z, we don't even care. Like road trips for you, we'll talk about you in a minute. But I know for me, growing up in the 80s, it was like we loaded into a sedan and drove to Florida from New Jersey, 24 hours. 24 hours. And all we had was a Walkman, and we never had enough batteries. You know that moment when you ran out of batteries and you couldn't just plug it into the cigarette lighter? It was done. You were finished. And books and things like that, it was like, man, just smacking your sister and like just getting into fights the whole time. My mom would bring all this stuff to do on the trip. Anyone else have a mom who always wanted to crochet and never actually did, but had all the bags around her feet? That was my mom. But now I think about like when I take road trips with my girls, we've got a minivan. Yes, I caved so long ago. 3 little girls. These are my little girls here up on the screen. We're going to show you a picture of them here in a second. There they are. So my little beauties, that's Lily on the far right. She's 11. London's 9 on the far left. And Harley is 5. Those are our little girls. And I've got a wife too, but it's not about us right now. It's about them. And so we load up now for road trips, and it's like we got this minivan, and the second row reclines and extends. I'm like, where was this when I was growing up? I used to sleep over the hump in the back on the floor. Anybody else have to do that? That wasn't bad, actually. I claim that a lot. I think I've got permanent back problems, but it wasn't bad. It was strangely put me to sleep. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the hum or just the smell of carbon monoxide. It could have been a lot of things in the 80s. But anyway, I think about that. Now our road trips, we leave. Here's the secret. When your kids are that age, you leave at dinner time, because we drive a lot to North Carolina, so it's like a 10, 11-hour drive. Does anyone know if crack this code? Here's a free hack. You leave at dinner, you brew yourself so much coffee and everything else, as dad, you get the AirPods in, you load up podcasts and audiobooks, and so you eat right when you leave, and then you get to that first, a couple movies have played, you get to the first gas stop at around 10 o'clock, you gas up the car, you empty everyone else's tanks in the gas station bathroom, and then you drive as far as you can while they're sleeping, all right? You invest in adult diapers, and you don't care about it anymore. Just kidding, that's too far. Although I have considered it, in fairness. That's how obsessed I am with making good time. There's nothing worse than someone waking up, and they're like, hey, can we stop? I'm like, are you kidding me? I'll ask my wife, I'm like, give me a clock, a countdown. How close are we to emergency? And so I force her to give me a time frame, which she loves, of course. She loves that. But I think of my childhood, I think of my dad. I want to just ask you, you think about upbringing, how would you describe your dad? If I was sitting with you and we're in a coffee shop and I said, hey, tell me a little bit about your dad. What was he like? I would say, some of you are chuckling loudly. Is your dad Clark Griswold from the Vacation movies? Or maybe John Candy from The Great Outdoors? Can you tell I'm in a total 80s mode right now? I apologize. Again, millennials, you grew up with so much technology. Growing up in the 80s, the back seat of those station wagons faced back, and the seatbelts were never really found. And that window opened, and we sat in traffic, and people looked at us, and we looked at them. It was the most awkward eye contact with total strangers. I'm 9 years old with no seatbelt on basically in a death trap. That was my childhood. But somehow we've all survived. Well, not all of us. I'm sure many died horrible deaths that way. But anyway, so I think about my dad. I think about this guy. He loved to laugh. That's probably why I'm thinking so many comedies. He loved to watch funny movies, and he just loved to laugh. He had this kind of really funny cackle. Super smart, really successful in business, loved God. But he also, the older that I got, the more I realized he went and he served our country in Vietnam. He was drafted, he was married to my mom, but they didn't have kids yet, so he got called up and he served and he responded. And that really affected him deeply, really deeply. We believe he had, and he even shared later in life, some of the scars and some of the things he endured over there. In fact, he told us at my mom's funeral about 15 years ago now. It was so strange. Have you ever been around someone, or maybe you're a veteran yourself, who doesn't really like to talk about war until way late in life? Then they start talking about it a lot. And so he started sharing about one moment in Vietnam when they were totally surrounded. His platoon was completely surrounded by the enemy in the middle of the jungle. And he said, the only way we could survive was we all dug a hole and lived in that hole for 30 days, for a month. I'm like, where did that come from, Dad? He's like, I don't know. I had kind of put it out of my mind. So I realized that he had pain and he had hurt because of that experience and other things. And so it actually helped me understand him more later in life. But growing up, it was interesting because I had moments where it was man, I love Saturday mornings with my dad, rolling out of bed, or what I should say is him grabbing me out of bed and be like, you're coming with me to the lumber yard. Blue Ridge Lumber in Blairstown, New Jersey is where I grew up. And we go every Saturday morning. We get there at 8 in the morning. And the only thing I would hold on to is we'd get haircuts, and then sometimes we'd go to the arcade, and I would play Spy Hunter at the arcade. This is going way back. It was such a great game. If I found that now, I'd probably want to put it in my basement. Such a great game. But I had so much fun with him. But, what's interesting, if you think of all the terms that God would choose to use to give us, to relate to him, to understand his relationship with us, think of all the ways God could describe himself to us for us to relate to him. Think about terms like, general. He could choose war metaphor, okay, I'm the general and you're a private or less. He could use terms like, master or boss. There's so many things that God could use, but But yet the term father is used over 400 times in the New Testament. It's a lot. In fact, Jesus used that term, pater, over 165 times. It was the word he used the most to refer to his relationship with God the Father. In fact, if you look at Matthew 6:9, this is the start of what we call the Lord's Prayer. And how does he start it when the disciples ask him how to pray? He says, "This then is how you should pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name." It's just interesting that is the choice. That's the word that is used. And what's interesting about that, there's a quote by a preacher in Atlanta named Louis Giglio, and he says, "The fatherhood of God is the skin of God for us to grab onto." So fatherhood is the skin for us to grab onto. That's the human picture. That's the human relationship that he uses so often to connect to us. But here's what's a little tricky. How we view our fathers, our earthly fathers, affects how we view God as a father. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever noticed that? That your view of your father actually influences your view of God as a father. And that just makes sense, right? I mean, that's your lens, that's your experience, that's what you know. But obviously it can have hard ramifications as well. If you think about your dad, if your dad was warm and loving, then when you hear about God as your father, you're like, oh, that's a great picture. I love that picture. God, my dad was very warm and very loving. But what about those who had dads that were cold and distant? Now your view of God is different, isn't it? Now you're thinking of God as maybe someone you're trying to earn his affection or earn his attention, and nothing you do can seem to get his gaze upon you. Was your dad in your corner? Was he an encourager? Or was he hard to please? That also can impact how we view our Heavenly Father. It's very interesting when we look at Scripture. Jesus tells an incredible story about a father and his two sons. Now, this story has it all. It has it all. It's got money, it's got inheritance, it's got gossip, there's mention of prostitutes, it's a broken family. This is a salacious story that would air as a Netflix limited series anytime. Based on the elements. In fact, this story that I'm going to tell you in a few minutes has been hailed as one of the best stories ever told, ever written, ever come up with shocking elements and an ending that leaves you really in an interesting spot. But before we get there, I want to take a moment to receive our offering. Now, those of you who have been attending Kensington for a while, you're part of this family, you understand that as we receive our offering, this is a time for you to give generously back to the God who gives us everything that we have. We believe the Bible teaches that God our Father has given us our talents, our abilities, our finances. Everything we have is from him, and we are simply stewards of that. And he asks us to give back a percentage of that to him so that we can trust him with our finances. But for those of you who have not taken that step of giving, maybe you've never trusted God that way or tried it, we came up with several ways here to make it really simple for you to give for the first time and to get started. It really is part of a discipleship journey. Part of your walking with Jesus is trusting him with your finances. And those ways are, first of all, you can text the word Kensington to the number 77977 and follow the prompts. You can go through our app. Very simple, very easy, very quick. You can do what my wife and I do and go on to kensingtonchurch.org/giving and set up a recurring gift so you don't, it's like every other bill you pay online. Or you can write a check and mail it or drop it in one of the bins by the doors. So thank you for your generosity. Thank you for being a part of that moment. We serve a generous God and we want to return that back to him. So Jesus tells a story of a father and his two sons. Now, when Jesus tells us, the context in Luke chapter 15 is it says that the sinners and others were listening close. They were leaning in to hear what Jesus had to say because he was teaching in a way that no one else was. Very powerful truths, very insightful, very convicting, but also just a very invitational approach through his parables. And so in Luke 15, you've got Jesus stepping into this first century Jewish family and events that are about to really rock their family to the core. So here we are in Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Let's walk through this story and see what it tells us about the father heart of God. Jesus continued in verse 11. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This is the parable of the prodigal son. I mean, this is so well known, even in culture around us, pop culture. People will refer to this. They'll refer to movies like, yeah, it's kind of a prodigal son story. I believe there's even a show on TV called The Prodigal Son. My goodness, I mean, this is everywhere. And so we're going to attempt to tell you the true story and what it reveals, not just about the brothers, but about the Father. And what does that mean to us as we seek to relate to God as our Father? So I'm going to dive into some of these details because remember, the first century audience that's listening to Jesus is going to catch things. Just like today, when I drop little tidbits in there about, man, remember those station wagons with the seat that faced back? You guys are like, oh yeah, I get it. Same way when Jesus told stories. They didn't have station wagons yet, but they had other things that they knew that were cultural touchstones that he would touch on and that they would understand. And so as we look at the story, it starts out with the younger son going to his father and saying, give me my share of the estate. So just pausing there, if you just read this, at first glance, you're thinking, okay, well the son just went to go cash out. He just asked dad, hey, give me my bag of gold, I want to leave. But what we have to understand is that this request was unheard of, shocking, rude, unbelievable. In fact, for the son to go to his dad and say, I want my inheritance now, essentially he's telling his dad what? Drop dead. You're dead to me. Because inheritances aren't normally accessed until the person who's giving away the money dies, right? And here's the thing too, this was very much an agricultural society. It was about land that you owned, it was about livestock and those ways. So this wasn't a clean, here's your check, son, go for it. This was about property, this was about selling land. This was a very complicated transaction that needed to be engineered here. So the father says, okay. So right away the first century audience is going, what? Because they're thinking this dad is going to drag this son out and publicly beat him for this and make an example of him for being so rude, insolent, and disrespectful. And yet it says the father divided his estate between them. Now here's another detail that may miss some of us. When it says, give me my share of the estate, he's the younger son. There's 2 sons. According to Mosaic law, the laws they were living by at this time, if you had your 2 oldest sons were the only 2 to receive any part of the estate. So again, if you think of the Bible, you think of stories about David being the 7th born. They had 0 inheritance. Now we're not like that. It's usually equally divided. But back then, the firstborn got 2/3 and the secondborn got 1/3 and the rest got nothing. Hopefully a job from their brothers after their dad died. So it says though that the father, notice what it says. It says the father divided his property between them. So in other words, he brought the older brother in and said, okay, your younger brother has asked for his share of the property. So I'm going to give it to him and I'm going to give you yours now as well. This was equally shocking to that audience. Why? Because the older brother should have said, Dad, can you give us a minute, please? I need to talk to my little brother here and kill him for asking you this. I mean, this was the moment where the older brother should have said, what are you doing? Are you insane? Beg dad's forgiveness. How dare you tell dad to drop dead? What are you thinking? Are you out of your mind? No, you better go. We're going to work this out. We got to reconcile this because this is a big deal, little brother. But he doesn't do that, does he? His silence is as shocking to the audience as the younger brother's request to go and get his money. So the older brother already doesn't step in and try to repair this broken family. So it keeps going. So the younger son then takes his share, and it says that he leaves in just a few days. Not long after that, he set off. Now, in a culture that any kind of business transaction takes a lot of time and negotiation, the longest and most deliberate of these negotiations were over land and property. How in the world could he have gotten this deal, this complicated legal agreement where the actual possession of the property will not transfer to the new owner until the dad dies? So the dad will stay as sort of like a steward. The sons are the owners, and the one son has now sold his interest to someone else quickly. So now you've introduced, essentially to do this, it would have been like he went down to a pawnbroker, hardcore pawn or something, and got what he could as fast as he could. It's like inheriting grandma's jewels, and instead of getting them appraised and cleaned and listed properly at an auction, it's running down to a pawn shop saying, "What will you give me right now, cash?" That was what he did. He was so impetuous. Scholar Howard Marshall thinks that the younger brother was around 17 years old when this happened. So think about it. Does that start to make some sense? Has anyone else made a bad decision when they were 17 years old? Hopefully not on this level. So he takes the money he gets, a lot smaller than it should have been, and he leaves town with full pockets and a dream to get out of Dodge. I'm never coming back. I'm going to a far country. He goes across the sea to an area called the Decapolis, which was 10 Gentile cities. In other words, he was like, I'm going to Vegas and I'm not coming home. That was his plan. And it works out about as well for him as it does for anyone else who says that at 17, who heads to Vegas with their life savings. Look at verse 17. And so when he gets there, he blows through his inheritance right away. He just wastes all of it with wild and just lavish living. And then a famine hits. So he's thinking, I could spend all my money, get a job, and set up shop. Well, a famine comes, and there's no jobs to be had. So now it's interesting. It says here that he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. The actual Greek there is he glued himself, or he clung to this citizen. In other words, he was kind of that house guest that wouldn't leave. So he's like, hey man, I got nothing. Can I stay with you? And in Middle Eastern culture, there was such a high value on hospitality that they can't just go, buddy, hit the road. It's bedtime. We're leaving. I'm closing the door. You're out. So what they would do in that culture to get rid of someone that was clinging like that, they would give them the worst imaginable job and hope that that would make them leave. So what does he do to this young Jewish man? He sends him to go and live with and feed the pigs. Again, according to Judaism, Mosaic law, pigs were an unclean animal. And so for him to feed them and live with them was a super humiliating and demeaning thing. And he's not being fed. He's starving. In a sense, he becomes like a slave because he has no way of taking care of himself, and this is his only way of living. So he hits rock bottom. Look at verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. So he hits rock bottom, and he's thinking in his mind, you know what? I know I've burned the bridge. I can't go back as a son. But even the servants that my dad has hired out are treated better than I am. I will go and say, Dad, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just let me work for you in the fields. I won't bother you. I won't do anything. Just let me live and do that. So he's heading back home. Now he's a runaway slave, barefoot, bloodied, smelling like pigs. Have you ever been around a big group of pigs before? They do not smell great. They really don't. And I spent some time in India a couple years ago and went with one of our missions teams there to visit Jaya and some of the ministry that we do there, one of our global partners. And there were pigs just in this area, kind of just outside where the housing was. And they were eating everything. And it was so gross to see, like just a really dirty, filthy animal. And he was living with them. And he wasn't showering. This guy wasn't like, hey, come on in, take a shower, take a load off, let's watch the game. The Masters is on this afternoon. Like, let's just relax and do this. He was being very mistreated. So when he was heading back home, he's rehearsing the speech. Has anyone ever rehearsed the speech they're going to say to their parents to try to get out of trouble? I certainly have. He's running through it in his mind. Maybe he'll take me back. Maybe he will let me just be a servant. And here's what's shocking. The audience would hear this and go, oh man, just wait until he gets back to town. The community was tight-knit. It was a small village, a couple hundred people. As he enters the town, everyone knew. You want to talk about the ultimate walk of shame. When he comes back through, it's going to be a gauntlet. A mob will form, mocking, deriding, making fun of, yelling at, scolding. How dare you do that to your father? Look at you, you're a failure. But he was willing to risk all of that just because he was starving and wanted to eat. But here's what's super shocking. What is the father doing when the son comes around the bend, still a long ways off? I find this so stunning. In my mind, I'm thinking, man, when he gets to the front door, after going through the gauntlet of mockery and shame and anger and rage that he's going to face with that mob of his neighbors that saw him leave so high and mighty, coming back humbled and broken, he's maybe going to get to the front door, knock on it, find a servant he remembers. Listen, can you get my dad? I just need to talk to him for a minute. I don't need anything. I'm not asking for money. Just please get him. And thinking maybe the dad would talk to him. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'd say, get out of here. You're not my son anymore. You left. You wanted me to drop dead. The father had every right to treat him that way, didn't he? For what he did. But what happens? It says that while the son was still a long way off, a far ways out, the father was looking for him. Now, according to the text, he's been gone for a while, maybe even years. Has the father been spending every day looking for his son, waiting for him to return, sitting on his front porch, stressing and praying and begging God to bring his son back to him? That's certainly what it seems like, because what are the chances that he would just walk outside with a morning glass of orange juice and see his son? He's looking for him, and when he sees him, he knows what he has to do. He knows for his son to get from where he is to where the dad is, he's going to have to go through a humiliating experience. So what does the father do? The father does something unthinkable in that culture. Men in that Middle Eastern culture did not run, ever. I would fit in great there. I'm like, why can't we bring that back? You know, there's dad jokes, dad shoes, dad bod. I'm pushing the dad bod boundaries, I think. I saw a picture of like Leo DiCaprio, like dad bod. I'm like, if that's a dad bod, then I must be granddad, or I don't know. So I like that idea. But in that culture, the slower you walked, the more dignified. So if you were walking slow, you had to be somebody. And so for a Middle Eastern man in the first century to grab the robes, pull them up, and run through the town, it was humiliating. I mean, anytime you see a grown man running fully dressed anywhere, it's a little bit unnerving, isn't it? If you're in an airport or at a mall or outside, it's like, why is that dude running? It's still weird. But there, it was like unimaginable. This guy's running through the town. So the father risks humiliation so that his son doesn't face that humiliation. The father takes the shame on himself so the son doesn't have to face any more shame. Isn't that amazing? And he runs, and when he gets to him, the son's like, Dad, okay, Dad, here's my speech. And then listen to how much he gets out. He gets to him. Well, first of all, before the son even says a word, it says, the father's filled with compassion for him. He ran to him and he threw his arms around him and kissed him. Before the son says anything, the dad grabs him around the neck, it says in the text, and kisses him on the cheek. Now, this is significant. This is saying to anyone who saw this happen, and believe me, the whole town's out there for this. This is a big moment. When you kiss someone on the cheeks like that, that's a kiss of forgiveness and reconciliation. He's saying before the son says a word, just your presence, just your repentance, just your return tells me all I need to know. And he grabs him around the neck and he starts kissing him. And then the son, it's like the son steps back and he's like, I gotta say something. Let me say something. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And the dad just stops him cold. He doesn't even let him get the rest of his offer out. He's like, okay, that's enough. And he says, quick, because his servants are with him. Bring the best robe and put it on him. By the way, who in this household would have had the very best robe? The father. The father. He says, get my robe and put it on him. Filthy, smelly, disgusting. Put this robe on him. This is my son. And put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Put that signet ring on, showing he has authority. Put sandals on his feet, which tells the servants, he is my son. He's not a servant, he's my son. Full status is restored to him. And then he goes further. He says, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Meat was so rare in that culture. It was so rare to eat meat like that, that this was cut in such a way where it had to be eaten in just a few hours. This was not buying a hind quarter of beef and putting it in your deep freezer for the year. This was happening now. This was the all-you-can-eat Golden Corral moment we've all been waiting for. It would have fed up to 200 people. He invited the entire town. And guess who was the guest of honor? The son that was so ashamed and so derided and so mocked was now wearing his dad's robe, the shoes, the ring, and he's at the head table as the guest of honor with the entire town. The father wanted everyone to know, this is my son and I love him and I'm restoring him. Accept him as a community once again. And they danced and they sang. And when this party started, it was only for adults. The kids would be outside, so things haven't really changed that much. And when the music got going and the dancing got going, that would start right around the time where all the men would be coming back from the fields. So when you heard music going, you're like, there's a party going on. And we haven't heard from the older brother in a while, have we? Let's look at the older brother's response to this moment. Meanwhile, verse 25, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the text says servants. It's probably more accurate to say little boys. It's actually literally little boys, and it's translated servants because a servant would never refer to the dad as your father. He would call him master. So anyway, he called one of the little boys and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Now, for one moment, before we dive into what happens, this is his brother. This is his baby brother. He may have beaten him up every day of his life, but deep down inside, you've got to love the little bro, right? You got to have a little bit of love for the guy you've been stepping on and beating on. Maybe that's why the kid had to get out of town. I can't take another day of this bully. But you would think, you'd be like, he's home. They didn't know if he was dead. They didn't know if he was alive. They had no idea. And he's like, he's home, safe and sound. Dad, your dad killed the fattened calf. It's a huge party. Listen how the brother responds. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. Now, when I read these next words, this is going to feel like a teenager in 2021 arguing with their parents. So as Americans, we're going to be like, this isn't that big a deal. But again, remember the original audience, first century, the older brother had a specific job to do. When there was a party thrown like this, the oldest brother should have run in, thrown on his maitre d' outfit, and hosted and welcomed guests. And he was basically the head butler, the maitre d', the guy who was in charge of everything. And the fact that he wasn't in that role would have been very suspicious and curious to the town who was all there. So when he became angry and refused to go in, everyone would have noticed. And it was very dishonoring to the dad. And so the dad goes out and confronts him. And he says, the father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I can celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? Woo. Man, if a kid said that to us now, this would be a big moment in that relationship, wouldn't it? But now imagine everyone hearing this. It's right outside the courtyard where the party's happening. Everyone sees this. Everyone hears this. This oldest son publicly shaming and rebuking his dad. And what's interesting here, the way the son is talking about his brother, he says, this brother of yours. Or excuse me, this son of yours. So in other words, he's already estranged from his family relationally and emotionally. He refuses to acknowledge it as his brother. And isn't it interesting that he uses the words, I've been slaving for you all these years. So the son who never left home felt like a slave. And the son who actually became a slave returned home to be a son again. So this is not one lost son. This is a father who has two lost sons. And the first lost son came back home and accepted the grace and love of his father. What will the second son do who never left? My son, the father said. And just to pause right there, there's a word for son that he uses there that is not the common usage of the word son. There's a word for son that's used almost exclusively in Scripture. This one is a word that is used to like a little boy. It's a term of endearment. It's saying, my sweet child, my sweet boy. The father gets tender with his petulant son. My son, you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And that's where the story ends. We have no idea if the older brother goes into the party. We have no idea what happens to the younger brother after. All we know is that this is where we are. And Jesus forces the audience to say, how do you think that this ends? What do you think happens next? It's one of the greatest stories ever told because of that truth. And the word we give to this story is the prodigal son. But the word prodigal, we use that a lot like, it's a rebellious, it's a black sheep. That's the prodigal, that's their prodigal, he's totally rebellious. But actually, prodigal means extravagantly generous, lavishly wasteful, and reckless. So you think about that. Who is really the prodigal in this story by that definition? It's the prodigal father. Because his love and grace is so extravagant, it is so lavish. In fact, I love this quote, grace is the face love wears when it meets imperfection. Grace is the face that love wears when it meets imperfection. This is that moment where when the father sees his son coming in, the father runs and it's like, boy, that love he has for him turns into grace. And then when he sees his other son so angry, so petulant, throwing a hissy fit, he shows him grace too. It's such an incredible picture. So I want to ask you, who are you in this story? Who are you in this story? Are you the younger brother? You've made devastating life choices and you've faced consequences and pain. You've felt lost. The Father is saying to you today, come home. Just come home. Don't envision some big mound of sin and shame and rebellion standing between you and God. He says, just come home. Just come home. There's grace for you. He puts the robe back on you. He puts the ring on. He puts the sandals on. He says, you are my child. There's nothing you can do to make me love you less, God says. Or maybe you're the older brother and you've been wearing a mask. You've never left. You've never rebelled on the outside, but boy, on the inside, you are angry. You are resentful. You are frustrated. God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why did this happen? You're dealing with pain and suffering by internalizing it, and the God that you serve is an angry dad who you are trying to please with works, and it never, ever works out. Maybe you're that older brother that's had enough. And God says to you, come home. Take off the mask. Show me who you really are. I love you. I know you. You're my precious child. Will you just come home? Don't live like a servant. Don't live like a slave. You're my son. You're my daughter. Will you come into the house and enjoy the life I have for you? Why are you choosing to live outside? I have grace for you. Will you come in? Will you come home? And to him, there is nothing you can do to make God love you more. How many of us sometimes have believed the lie that if I serve harder, if I pray harder, if I read more, then maybe God will just love me more? Because of maybe a picture we got from our earthly father. But God says, no. I am the perfect Father, the prodigal Father, the one who loves you unconditionally, the one who has grace for you. So I say to you today, will you come home? Come home. Because the extravagant love of the prodigal Father is chasing you. It's following you. His love is generous. His love is extravagant. His love, you could even say his love is reckless. He will not stop until he finds you. Will you come home? God, I ask you even now that you would stir up hearts in this room, that we would turn back to you, that prodigals who have run off would come home, that older brothers who have never left but inside they have would come home, that we would see you as our perfect Father, and that your love that you have for us, your unbelievable grace and mercy would shatter all of our fear and invite us back into relationship, God, that we wouldn't see our sin, that we wouldn't see the mound of things we've done as separating us from you, but that we would see that we are righteous because of you, Jesus. And we know, God, you don't see our sin when you look at us. Now you see your Son. So I pray even now, God, that you would draw even one back home to yourself, to enter into relationship with you, that no longer they believe the lies, that they've done too much, they've gone too far, there's too much junk, that they would understand that your grace is greater than all of our sin. Even now, God, I pray that your unbelievable love would find us, restore us, and bring us back home. It's in the powerful name of Jesus Christ that we ask it. Amen.
Spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. And you have been so kind to me. you're a foe, still your love fought for me. And you have been so, so good to me. And I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. Yes, you did, yes. And you have been so, so kind to me. Yeah. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me.
No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me.
Yeah. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No shadow, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. Well, I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Sometimes on this journey, I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. My story isn't over, my story's just begun. Cause failure won't define me, cause that's what my Father does. No failure won't define me, yeah, that's what my Father does. Lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house.
journey's where it starts. But you never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. Cause failures never final when the Father's in the room. Oh, failures never final when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house. Prodigals come home, the homeless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide, the dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place, the cynical find faith. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho walls quake, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Oh, love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Check your shame. It ain't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame. Check your shame. It ain't welcome. You're in the Father's house. You're in the Father's house. You're in the Father's house.
Can everyone stand up real quick? We're so glad you were here with us, and we're gonna leave in a second. I just want to encourage you, every generation in the room. Sorry, millennials and Gen Z, I was a little hard on you. I love you. Here's what I want to say to you, though. For those of you who found yourselves in this story today, here's what I want to just give you this truth as we leave. That the love of God, the perfect Father, the love of God in Jesus Christ, there's nothing you could do to be separated from that. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 8. He says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I'm sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Do you believe that today? Do you believe that you are his son, you are his daughter, and he's saying to you, will you come home? No matter what you've done, nothing can separate you. That list is totally exhaustive. Will you come home, prodigal son? And will you take the mask off, older brother, and come home? Or maybe for some of you, you recognize that you heard a story today of the only Father who is truly perfect, and you want to know him through Jesus. We've got a prayer team in the lobby. Will you go and talk to someone? We'd love to have a conversation with you about what it looks like to follow Jesus and to enter relationship with the Father. Thank you for being with us. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.